Sunnova is a publicly traded residential solar company. If you've ever heard of companies that'll put a quote-unquote free solar panel on your roof and then make your power meter run backwards, that sort of thing. Yeah, Sunnova is one of those companies. Now, if you've ever heard of Sunnova, it might be because there was a spate of news stories where people who had dementia or who were dying of terminal cancer mysteriously decided that this was the right time in their life to sign up for a 25-year solar contract with Sunnova. Yeah, this video isn't about that. Instead, what this video is about is that I have Sunnova's second set of books. There was a giant screw up with Microsoft Excel, and I wound up with Sunnova's second set of books. And by second set of books, I mean that I have an almost one-to-one duplicate copy of the numbers published in Sunnova's quarterly financial statements, but a lot of the numbers are different, and I also have the Excel formulas showing how they were changed. Like, that's a second set of books. I don't know how else I could possibly describe that. It's a second set of books, that's what it is. Now, when I sat down and analyzed the second set of books, I found a long series of very strange and concerning irregularities, and I can often be very specific with my questions and concerns. For example, customers are important to any company, and solar systems are important to solar companies, obviously. So it's important that both customers and systems are accurately reported to investors. And crucially, these are not the same thing. Some of Sunnova's customers don't have systems, and some of their customers have more than one system. So systems and customers are supposedly defined differently. But if you go to cell EN567, there are instructions written in plain English saying to use the same number in both places. And then it says to only show the total row, and based on how Sunnova reports its numbers, that has the effect of covering all of this up. Now, not only does the math show these instructions were actually followed, but the instructions themselves are recorded as being written by Kat Scherer, which just happens to be the name of Sunnova's Director of Financial Reporting. So yeah, I thought that was really strange. How did all of that happen? Now that is just one of many very strange and concerning irregularities that I have found in Sunnova's second set of books. So I'm gonna make a whole series of videos going through them. This particular video is going to show you how to access Sunnova's second set of books, and then I'm going to show you how to actually read them. And once I showed you how to read them, I'm then going to show you the first big discovery I made about the hidden data and how I made it to provide an example to you for how you can analyze this. The rest of the videos in this series will then show you the very specific areas where the numbers in Sunnova's second set of books are, in my opinion, kind of tricky to explain. And just as background footage, I'm going to be throwing up some summary slides of some of the things I'm going to be discussing in this video series. We're going to have a really long but fun and easy to understand deep dive into a series of financial irregularities. Before we go any further, however, I do need to mention two key details about myself. First, I do have a financial interest in Sunnova's demise, and second, I want to remain anonymous. That probably won't happen, but it's still worth a shot. But let me back up for a minute and give you a little bit of context. Personally, I'm not surprised Sunnova has two sets of books. I'm only surprised I got my hands on them. And you're gonna laugh when you see how dumb the Excel screw up was, by the way. But anyways, why was I even looking at Sunnova in the first place? Good question, let me explain. Very, very few people grasp just how much money can flow through a residential solar company. If you're running a residential solar company and you install a few tens of thousands of solar systems a year, the annual installation cost for your company's solar systems, not anything else, just the installation costs, just for your company, will exceed the GDP of a small country. It's an extraordinary amount of money, especially given how small these companies can be. And if this comes as a surprise to you, then you probably don't realize how expensive solar systems are. If you have one on your roof, then it probably costs more than your car. This means that virtually every solar panel needs to be financed because the homeowner just doesn't have enough money to buy it up front for cash. Almost none of them do. But the solar companies don't have the money to finance it either. So they need to securitize and sell the systems to investors, similar to how mortgages can be made into mortgage-backed securities. Now, there's a chain of events that leads these companies into a whole lot of trouble. And step one in the chain is that these solar systems are eligible for tax credits. And under anything other than just a straight cash sale, which almost never happens, the solar company will either wind up with the tax credit or wind up with the money from the tax credit. And if they wind up with the tax credit, they could de facto sell it. So tax credits are cash to them. They're not a discount on taxes like you might think about it, they're cash in the pocket. Now, for very obvious reasons, residential solar companies are always strapped for cash, and they're always facing enormous pressure to just find a little bit more money right now. However, if a residential solar company tells the IRS that their solar systems are more valuable than they actually are, then the residential solar company gets a bigger tax credit, and that means they get more quick money right now. And it will be almost impossible for the IRS to know. So there's an extremely strong temptation to just grease the wheel here by not being entirely honest with the IRS. However, the biggest problem here is not that the IRS might find out. Instead, the biggest problem here is that due to a quirk in how these companies are financed, if they misreport the value of their solar systems in order to receive an inappropriately large tax credit, that would actually cost them more in the long run to cover up than they would make from doing it in the first place. So if they do this to fix an immediate problem, it eventually makes their cash problems worse, which means they have to grease the wheels a little more often, which makes the problem worse. And eventually, they don't have a wheel, they just have a pile of grease. And that would be an accounting scheme that would be, as far as I can tell, all but mathematically guaranteed to collapse eventually. And the way these companies are financed makes them uniquely susceptible to winding up in situations where they're running this sort of accounting scheme. And this has nothing to do with how solar panels are built or how they work or how good they are for the environment. It has everything to do with how they're paid for. Now, even though companies doing this sort of accounting scheme would face almost certain collapse eventually, that would still take years to happen. In the meantime, however, they would have a massive short-term competitive advantage over companies that were not doing this. So if you're running a residential solar company that is not doing this, and your competitors are doing it, then it's very easy for you to get run out of business in the short run, even though your competitors would be all but guaranteed to collapse in the long run. So this is the sort of thing that can easily take over an industry, and that's why I was looking at Sunnova. Now, just because the path to how someone could find themselves running this kind of accounting scheme is clearly marked, that does not mean anyone actually went down that path. However, I believe there is a telltale sign that a company is doing this kind of accounting scheme, and that telltale sign is the O&M death spiral. If you were trying to run this kind of accounting scheme, then you would have to cover it up. And the way you would cover it up is by somehow convincing investors that cash flows that don't exist do exist. If a residential solar company was trying to do that, they would be practically required, and would eventually be mathematically required, to manipulate their cash flows by hiding O&M expenses. Operations and maintenance might not sound sexy, but it's the main expense apart from the solar systems themselves. If you hide your main expense, the cash flows look bigger. It's that simple. However, O&M is also used to value the systems for tax purposes in the first place. This creates a positive feedback loop. If you underbill O&M, that will inflate the FMV, but inflating the FMV will cause the tax credits to be overclaimed. But overclaiming the tax credits will cause the accounting scheme. But the accounting scheme will cause the O&M to be underbilled. But underbilling the O&M will inflate the FMV. But inflating the FMV will cause the tax credits to be overclaimed. And around and around and around you go. So you should be able to see the problem here, right? So just to be perfectly clear here, if a residential solar company was running a major loss on their O&M, then they would have to be committing some kind of fraud. And that's not according to me, that's according to Sunnova's then CFO Robert Lane, who said this on tape.
We cannot generate a loss at O&M, and because then that would be fraud.
Robert Lane's full answer and the question he was asked will be shown later on in this video series. Not that it makes him look any better though. So when I reanalyzed Sunnova's reported O&M figures in light of the numbers in Sunnova's second set of books, they appeared to indicate that Sunnova is running a huge loss on O&M that is not being properly reported to investors. Now that's what I found when I checked the numbers, but obviously Sunnova can't be doing that because their own CFO said,
because then that would be fraud.
So, you know, that strikes me as being really strange. Just as an amusing side note, I can't say Robert Lane knew about this, but I can say he was the chief financial officer of Sunnova when this was going on. And if you go to the info tab of the file containing the second set of books, Robert Lane is the listed author of the file. And it was last modified by Kat Scher. Hey, her name pops up again, what a coincidence. Now, just to be clear here, I'm not accusing Robert Lane of ever having worked at a company where something financially unsustainable may have occurred. I mean, why would I make such accusations when other people already have? According to Seeking Alpha, before Robert Lane worked at Sunnova, he worked at an energy broker dealer that went bankrupt, and was described by one of the bankruptcy trustees as having a dubious investor that had, quote, many of the characteristics of a Ponzi scheme, unquote. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that information is in a paragraph that starts with the following sentence. Quote, notably, our research reveals that Chief Executive Officer William Berger's biography curiously omits his previous role at Enron Corporation. Unquote. William Berger was CEO of Sunnova until very recently. He just resigned. And he used the name John Berger when he worked as an energy trader at Enron. His LinkedIn page says this is, quote, East Power Trading, unquote. Interestingly enough, a man named John Berger, but who had the same job, the same age, and enrolled in Harvard Business School at the same time as the man now known as William Berger, went on the record in a January 2002 Chicago Tribune article defending the actions of Jeffrey Skilling, the CEO of Enron, by saying, quote, "It was competitive, but frankly, that's how you get to the top," unquote. To be clear, we're talking about this Jeffrey Skilling. Okay, now it's finally time to get to the moment that I know you have all been waiting for. So, you know how every few years you hear about someone somewhere making a truly legendary screw-up with Microsoft Office? You know, like a screw-up with Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word that just reveals a ton of information they didn't want anyone to have? Yeah, this is one of those times. Okay, so how on earth did I get my hands on Sunnova's second set of books? Well, let's start at www.google.com. Let's type Sunnova quarterly results into Google and click on the very first result. I'm going to be using the third quarter 2024 results in this video series. I have been working on this for some months, and the fourth quarter results only came out at the beginning of March, so my exact line-by-line analysis is going to be with the third quarter 2024 results. Now, I'm going to click on the supplemental workbook file right here and download it, and then I'm going to open the file and click Enable Editing. Now, if you click around this file, you'll notice that all of these cells are formulas, not values. And the formulas reference parts of the spreadsheet that are hidden over here. So, for example, if you click on cell AL100, you'll see that it references cell EK100. Oh, column EK is somewhere over here. See, it goes from column AO to column EQ. There's dozens of columns right here that are clearly full of data that are hidden. And the numbers reported investors are referencing this hidden data. However, you can't open these columns because, as you can see, it's a protected sheet, and if you go over to here, there's a password that you have to enter to unprotect it. However, Sunnova made a very key mistake. You see, copy and paste has not actually been disabled in this file, and whoever made this file clearly didn't realize that you can highlight hidden rows and columns in Excel. So all you have to do is open up a blank Excel workbook and then highlight all of the hidden rows and columns in Excel. There's a couple ways to do this. I just click to the column to the right of the hidden columns and then just drag all the way to the left, back to column A. This highlights everything back to column A, and then I can just copy and paste. Now that all of the data is in a different file, I can simply adjust the formatting settings to reveal everything that was previously hidden. It sometimes freezes at this point, so I recommend that you save it. You can now repeat this process for the other tabs in this file, although the bulk of the analysis will be on the first tab. And this will work on every single supplemental workbook file that Sunnova has published since the second quarter of 2020. So let's zoom out. You are now looking at two sets of books side by side with Excel formulas connecting them. This over here on the left is the front end data. That's the first set of books, and it contains all of the numbers reported to investors, as well as some hidden rows containing information investors normally wouldn't see, and I'll get to those hidden rows in a minute. Meanwhile, this over here on the right is the hidden data. That's the second set of books. It's an almost one-to-one duplicate version of the first set of books, except many of the numbers are different, and the Excel formulas show exactly how those numbers were changed. If I click on virtually any cell in the front-end data, it will contain a formula that references two other cells, and these will be highlighted for you if you just click up here on this bar. And as you can see, one of the cells referenced is in the hidden data, and the other is in this layer here on the left, on the center left. And if we zoom in on that, we can see that this layer is labeled plugs. For the most part, the plugs layer just contains raw numbers that appear to have been manually entered as values, or the negatives of them. So for example, these two cells right here, one of them's the negative of the other. So the numbers shown to investors are essentially calculated by taking the hidden data over here and modifying them by whatever is entered into plugs. If there is no plug, the formula adds a zero and nothing changes. This allows Sunnova to modify the front-end data it reports to investors in whatever way it wants and have the formulas come out looking clean. This process also means that Sunnova can't claim that the plugs and hidden data don't mean anything because the Excel formulas directly connect them to the numbers Sunnova reports to investors. So if Sunnova claims that all of this hidden number stuff is wrong and they're not actually real, then they would be admitting that all of their reported numbers are fake. It's a very difficult situation situation for them to explain. Okay, great. This all seems really strange, you might be thinking. Sunnova has all these numbers they're moving around, but how do you know what any of this actually means? Like how do you read it? Good question. So first things first, Sunnova doesn't seem to be using plugs to make up numbers out of thin air. Instead, Sunnova seems to be using plugs to move numbers around. And once you figure out how this works, you can follow the plugs to see what got moved around where and how. So let's go to row 570 for an example. So if we look here, we can see that between rows 570 and 607, Sunnova calculated the number of customers deployed during the period 3 times, but they only show one version of this numbers to investors. It's this version down here. Meanwhile, however, this version up here that is normally hidden from investors, these are hidden rows, has far more customer categories than the version of the data that is reported to investors. And the totals rows, as you can see, match what is reported directly to investors. However, many of these categories in these hidden rows are blank, so what gives? Well, let's take rows 572 and 573 for example. These are the lease and lease storage customers. Quick side note, if you hear the words quote lease storage unquote, pay attention because they play an important role in almost every irregularity I found. So if we go to the plugs layer, we can see that, well, first of all, let's highlight the formulas, and we can see it references the plugs layer, references the plugs layer, and if we go back to the plugs layer, we can see that what very clearly happened is all of the lease storage customers were deleted and then moved into the normal lease category. And if we go all the way to the hidden data, we can see that Sunnova very clearly privately records lease storage customers right over here in the hidden data, but it then uses plugs to move them all into the lease customer category before showing them to investors. And if you run through enough of these formulas, you realize that the hidden data over here, which appears to be unlabeled at first glance, actually does have labels. It's just all the way over here in column H. So you can prove that, for example, the label in cell H573 does refer to the data in cell EN573, all the way over here in the hidden data. It's directly linked by formulas. This is clearly what the label is referring to, even though it's many columns away. So if we go back over here, it starts to become pretty obvious what happened. The apparently blank customer categories are just the empty categories that are left after all of the data got moved out into some other category. And the 4 remaining categories are the categories all the data got moved into. And ultimately, that is the version of the numbers that Sunnova reports to investors. So let's go back to the plugs layer and see how they got moved around. And I'm actually going to copy and paste these labels so it's easier to follow. Again, all these plugs were directly linked to these labels by the formulas, but the labels are, many columns away, so it's just easier if I move them over. So, as explained, Sunnova is deleting all of the customers out of some categories and then adding them to other categories. So all you have to do is go look at the categories that all the customers got rolled into and see what other plugs are needed to zero them out. And that will tell you what got moved where. For the lease and PPA customers, this is very easy. 4,850 customers in the most recent quarter were deleted from lease storage, and 4,850 were added to lease. Obviously, all of the lease storage customers got moved into the lease category. So let's go ahead and color code that. Let's make it green. And also, as you can see, all of the easy PPA customers were deleted and added into the PPA category. That one's obvious too. It's clear that they moved one into the other. So let's go ahead and color code that one as well. Let's make this one orange. Now, the loan and other categories are where it gets a little more complicated because they're moving more than one customer category into another. But if you add up loan, loan storage, unique battery loan, and accessory loan, it zeroes out. And this will zero out for every quarter you have data for. So if you just take all of the plugs in those categories back however many quarters this is, see it zeroes out. It's clearly consistently every single quarter it adds up to zero out if you do it this way. So clearly, the loan storage, unique battery loan, and accessory loan customers are all getting moved into loan. Also, as you can tell from the labels, it's kind of obvious just from the labels how this would be moved around. And lastly, we can see that service, cash sale, and other zero out. If you're doing this yourself, the only point of confusion you might run into is that there are quarters where certain customer categories had negative growth. So the plugs removing them are positive, and the plugs adding them into the final customer category they rolled into are negative. That happened with unique battery loan customers in the most recent quarter, for example. Great, so now we know exactly how many customers are in each of these hidden categories and where they got moved to. However, that doesn't mean anything unless we actually know what the hidden categories mean. Like, what does lease storage or loan storage actually mean? And, well, that's a lot easier to follow if we switch to the cumulative customer numbers. So right here is the extra detailed version, the cumulative customer numbers, starting in row 531, running to row 544. Now, of course, as you can see, a lot of these rows are blank, but there aren't really many plugs here. And the reason why is actually is calculated off of the net customer numbers added. So the net customer numbers and the number of customers that were added during just that one quarter. The cumulative customer numbers are the customers that Sunnova has just all of them added up over time that they've ever had. So if we go to the net customer numbers, we can see that if we just delete all of these plugs and the handful right here at the start of the cumulative customer numbers, the data flows through on modify because there are no plugs, and the totals row matches exactly with the version down here at the bottom, which is the one that's reported to investors. So investors see this version. Sunnova has this version, of course, that they don't show investors, but it's far more detailed, and it also matches exactly with the hidden data back here. So basically what the point of me explaining this is to show that these numbers back here and these numbers up here and these labels up here are the same. It's just it takes a more circuitous route through the hidden data and through the the plugs and everything. So first of all, let me undelete all of those plugs. So let's take the cumulative customer numbers and go over to the back end and place them here. Actually, let me take the color-coded version. Now, first things first, this file is organized annually, but the data is filled quarterly. Since this is the third quarter report, that means there's a trailing fourth quarter that's full of dummy data. So let's just go ahead and delete that. And as you can see, if you just look like anywhere in the spreadsheet, it's either blank or it just has dummy data. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a copy of the previous quarter's data. They're just using it to fill space. Now, if we go back to the plain old supplemental workbook, we can see that when Sunnova reports customers to investors, they break them down by solar and essentially non-solar customers. So now we can just start comparing and start to figure out what this stuff means or what it's supposed to mean or what Sunnova's claiming it is. This is just basic cross-referencing. So for example, if you add up the lease and lease storage customers, you get 127,804. That's exactly the number of lease solar customers Sunnova reported. And if you add up each of these quarters all the way back as far as Sunnova reports data, or at least reports what's total solar and non-solar, lease and lease storage combined will add up with exactly what they report. And if you add up PPA and easy PPA customers, exactly the same will happen. That equals what they report. And if you add up loan and loan storage, see this is 103,000. Here it's 103,000. Every quarter it will add up. If you add them one by one and check them, it will add up exactly. So when Sunnova is reporting solar customers, it's these 6 categories here. So the question is, what do these 6 categories mean? So the first 3 categories are very easy. Sunnova has lease PPA and loan solar systems. Those have to go somewhere. Just logically, you would assume that they would go in those categories. And the number Sunnova reports them is more or less what you would expect. Plus, Sunnova is claiming that these are solar customers. And if we assume that Sunnova is not lying to investors about that, then that is technically a company-friendly assumption. The real question is that these weird little categories that they move into these bigger categories: lease storage, easy PPA, and loan storage. Now, of these, the easiest one to explain is easy PPA. I'll go into PPAs in detail in the next video, but Sunnova offers normal PPAs and they also offer something called an easy pay PPA. And the easy pay PPA basically tries to average out the monthly payments, so it's kind of like a mix between a normal PPA and a lease. The easy PPA is the far more popular option of the two. Most of their PPA customers are easy PPA. So these numbers where you have like 80% of the customers are easy PPA is exactly what you would expect to see, and it's not suspicious at all that these two categories would be combined. That makes total sense. What's suspicious, however, are the lease and loan storage categories. What on earth are these? Well, if you peruse Sunnova's financial disclosures, they often describe battery customers as energy storage customers or energy saving systems, I believe, stuff like this. They use the word storage a lot when describing battery customers. In addition, if you break open Sunnova's pre-sale reports, they describe customers with batteries as lease storage customers, lease in the lease/PPA securitizations. Although the pre-sales wind up being a whole other can of worms that will probably get their own individual video. But suffice to say, there is a connection between a customer having a battery and a customer being called lease storage. So, all right, let's organize this. Now, if we break out the quarterly presentations, we get a pretty good idea of what the loan and lease storage customers have to be. And actually not the third quarter, we have to go to, let's go to the fourth quarter 2023. If you scroll through the presentation, you'll eventually see at the start of every presentation until I believe the first quarter of 2024. Around that time they stopped showing this, but from then until many years ago, they have a graphic that looks something like this. And here they report the battery penetration rate and the battery attachment rate. And the battery attachment rate is the percentage of net customers added, new customers in that quarter who have solar systems. And the battery penetration rate is the percentage of cumulative customers, the overall customers they've had that have batteries. Now, if we start breaking down these numbers, we start to figure out very quickly what the hidden data means. So if you start off by, if you go back to the third quarter of 2023 report, you can see that they report 3,701 battery retrofits performed life to date. And then 4Q 2023, they report 4,184. So, 4,184 minus 3,707, or put the formula on the wrong side, 477. If you go back to this relevant quarter here, it's essentially identical to the change in the number of unique battery loans. And if you go back quarter by quarter and manually add and subtract all of the reported battery retrofits, you'll see that clearly unique battery loan and and battery retrofits are basically the same thing. There's some at the beginning that are not, but in every quarter since then, virtually all of them, or literally all of them, have to be battery retrofits. So that's the battery retrofits. The juice of the matter, though, is if we take the penetration rate. Now, if you go through every single bloody quarterly report and you pull the battery penetration rate out of each and every one of them one by one and add them up, and you multiply the total customer count down here by the penetration rate each quarter, it will exactly match, or almost exactly match, the total number of lease storage, loan storage, and unique battery loans. Now, if you go back down to the net customer numbers, however, and you multiply their total in each quarter by the battery attachment rate on origination, it will exactly match the number of lease and loan storage customers. Of course, battery retrofits are not done at origination, so they wouldn't count in the battery attachment rate origination, but they would count the penetration rate. So what this tells us is it's incredibly clear, undeniable, that lease storage and loan storage customers have batteries. And importantly, they have all of the batteries, or lease storage, loan storage, and unique battery loans contain all of the batteries, because if they didn't contain all the batteries, this wouldn't match. So as you can see, Sunnova is starting to get locked down into what sorts of stories they could tell about what this data could mean. And once I put that key detail together, that lease storage and loan storage customers have batteries, I asked one question and these customer numbers fell apart. Or at least they did in my analysis, as far as I could tell, in my own opinion, allegedly. And that in turn led to me finding a whole series of other irregularities that led to this series of videos. So I'll cover it in the next video in this series, but in the meantime, try to see if you can guess what my question was. If you don't want to miss that video, subscribe and ring the bell. And if you like and comment, the algorithm will promote this video to more people and help get this information out there.